The signal came through on a Tuesday morning, crackling across the void of space in a desperate loop that made Communications Officer Sarah Chen sit up straighter at her monitoring station aboard the deep space research vessel Endurance. The transmission was weak, fragmented but unmistakably artificial. More importantly, it was clearly a distress call. "Captain Rodriguez, you need to hear this," Sarah called out, her fingers dancing across the console to clean up the signal. The bridge of the Endurance hummed with quiet efficiency as the small crew of 12 went about their routine surveys of the outer rim systems. Captain Maria Rodriguez approached Sarah's station, her weathered face showing the kind of calm concern that came from 30 years of space service. "What do we have, Chen?" "Distress signal, Captain. But it's not from any human vessel." Sarah's voice carried a note of excitement mixed with worry. "The transmission pattern and frequency modulation are completely foreign. I think we're looking at first contact." The words hung in the air like a charged particle field. First contact. Every human who had ever looked up at the stars had wondered about this moment. The Endurance crew had been exploring the frontier for 2 years, hoping to find signs of intelligent life. But actually receiving an alien distress call was beyond their wildest expectations. "Put it on speaker," Rodriguez ordered, moving to stand behind Sarah's chair. The alien transmission filled the bridge with strange, musical tones that seemed to pulse with urgency. Beneath the melodic quality, there was something unmistakably desperate about the rhythm and repetition. "Can you translate any of it?" Rodriguez asked. "Working on it," replied Dr. James Wright, the ship's xenolinguist, from his position at the science station. His eyes were bright with the thrill of professional challenge. "The computer's running pattern analysis now. Give me a few minutes." While Wright worked his linguistic magic, Rodriguez turned to her navigator. "Lieutenant Torres, plot a course to the signal's origin." "Already on it, Captain," Torres responded, his hands moving efficiently across his navigation console. "The signal is coming from the Kepler 442 system, approximately 18 light-years from our current position. At maximum warp, we're looking at a 6-day journey." Rodriguez nodded. 6 days wasn't terrible, but for beings in distress, every hour could matter. "Engineering. What's our status?" Chief Engineer Marcus Thompson's voice came through the comm from the engine room. "We're in good shape, Captain. Fusion reactors are running at optimal efficiency, and the warp drive just finished its maintenance cycle. We can sustain maximum warp for the full journey without any problems." The captain felt a familiar weight settle on her shoulders. Command decisions in space were often made with incomplete information, but this one felt particularly heavy. They were potentially about to make first contact with an alien species, and that species was in trouble. "Dr. Wright, any progress on the translation?" she asked. The scientist looked up from his console, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. "I've got something, Captain. It's rough, but the computers found repeating mathematical sequences that correspond to distress patterns in several Earth languages. The basic message seems to be help needed urgently, repeated in multiple variations. There are also coordinate references and what appears to be a description of their situation." "What kind of situation?" Wright frowned as he studied his readouts. "That's where it gets complicated. The best translation I can manage suggests they're describing some kind of environmental catastrophe, something about their world becoming poisoned and their people falling to the deep sleep. It's quite poetic, actually, but not very specific." Rodriguez made her decision. "Set course for Kepler 442, maximum warp. Send a response on the same frequency letting them know help is coming. Dr. Wright, prepare a first contact protocol message." As the Endurance changed course and jumped to warp speed, the crew settled into the routine of a long journey. But this wasn't just any journey. They were racing toward the unknown to help beings they had never met, from a world they couldn't imagine. Over the next 6 days, Dr. Wright worked tirelessly to improve his translation algorithms. The alien transmissions continued, becoming more frequent and increasingly desperate. By day 3, Wright had managed to establish that the aliens called themselves the Zalani, and their homeworld was called Zelanos. The situation on Zelanos, as far as Wright could determine, involved some kind of atmospheric contamination that was causing widespread illness. The Zalani described symptoms that sounded like severe respiratory distress and systemic organ failure. Whatever was happening to their world, it was happening fast. "Captain," Wright reported on day 4 of their journey, "I'm getting more detailed transmissions now. The Zalani seem to have realized that someone is responding to their distress call. They're providing more specific information about their crisis. What have you learned?" Wright's expression was grim. "Their star went through some kind of unusual solar flare activity about 2 weeks ago. The radiation appears to have triggered chemical reactions in their atmosphere that are producing toxic compounds. The Zalani are a carbon-based species like us, but their respiratory system is much more sensitive than ours. What would be mildly irritating to a human is proving lethal to them." Rodriguez felt her heart sink. "How long do they have?" "Based on their transmissions, maybe 2 weeks before their population centers become completely uninhabitable. They've already had to evacuate several cities." The weight of responsibility pressed down on the captain even harder. 12 humans against a planetary catastrophe. It seemed impossible, but they had to try. On day 5, something changed in the alien transmissions. Dr. Wright called the senior staff to the bridge with urgency in his voice. "They're asking about us now," Wright explained as the crew gathered. "The Zalani want to know what kind of beings we are, what world we come from. They're describing their own planet, and I think they're trying to understand if we can actually help them." "What are they saying about their world?" asked Dr. Lisa Park, the ship's biologist. Wright consulted his notes. "Zelanos orbits a stable G-class star at a distance that provides moderate temperatures year-round. No extreme weather, no seismic activity, no dangerous predators. They describe it as a gentle world that has always provided for their needs. Their society seems to have developed in almost perfect harmony with their environment." The humans exchanged glances. Earth was many things, but gentle was not a word that came to mind. "What should we tell them about Earth?" Rodriguez asked. Dr. Park spoke up. "Maybe we should start with the basics, that we're from a world with similar atmospheric composition, that we're carbon-based life forms, that we have experience with environmental challenges." "No," said Chief Engineer Thompson, shaking his head. "If we're going to help them, they need to know what they're dealing with. Tell them the truth." Dr. Wright began composing a response that described Earth in basic terms: a world with extreme temperature variations, violent weather systems, seismic activity, dangerous radiation from their star, and countless predatory species. A world where life had to adapt, overcome, and survive against constant challenges. The response from the Zalani came back within hours, and it was full of what Wright could only describe as horrified fascination. "They want to know how we survived on such a death world," Wright reported. "The concept seems almost incomprehensible to them. They're asking if we're certain we understood their distress call correctly because they can't imagine how beings from such a harsh world could possibly help them with their gentle world's problems." Captain Rodriguez smiled grimly. "Tell them that surviving on a death world teaches you a thing or two about dealing with environmental catastrophes. Tell them help is coming, and we'll figure out a solution together." On the final day of their journey, as the Endurance dropped out of warp at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, they got their first visual of Zelanos. It was beautiful. A blue-green jewel of a world with perfect white cloud formations swirling over vast continents, covered in what looked like carefully maintained forests and gleaming cities. My God, whispered Dr. Park. It's like a garden world. But even from their distance, they could see the problem. Dark patches in the atmosphere created swirling brown clouds over several continents. The perfect world was being poisoned by its own air. Captain? Sarah Chen called out from communications. We're receiving a direct transmission from Zelanos. It's not automated this time. I think we're talking to actual Zelani officials. The transmission came through as a complex mixture of musical tones and what sounded like harmonic overtones. Dr. Wright's translation system worked for several minutes before producing a rough approximation in English. Greetings, beings from the Death World. We are the Zelani High Council. We welcome you to our system, though we fear you may have come far for nothing. Our world is dying, and we do not see how anyone, even survivors of such a harsh world as yours, can help us. Our greatest scientists have declared the situation hopeless. Rodriguez stepped forward to the communications station. Dr. Wright, transmit my response. She began speaking clearly and slowly, giving Wright time to translate. Greetings, Zelani High Council. We are humans from Earth. We have traveled far to help because no one should face catastrophe alone. You say your greatest scientists have declared the situation hopeless, but we have a saying on our world. There's no such thing as hopeless, only solutions we haven't thought of yet. We would like permission to approach your world and assess the situation ourselves. The response came back quickly. You have our permission, brave humans. We will guide you to our capital city of Zelanthos, but we must warn you, the atmospheric conditions that are killing our people may be dangerous to you as well. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his console. Captain, I'm reading the atmospheric composition of the affected areas. The toxic compounds would cause severe respiratory irritation and potential lung damage in humans, but it's not immediately lethal to us. Dr. Park nodded in agreement. Our respiratory systems and general physiology are much more robust than theirs appear to be. What's a death sentence to the Zelani would be like working in a moderately polluted environment for us. Rodriguez felt the first stirring of hope. Maybe, just maybe, their survival skills learned on humanity's death world might actually make a difference here. As the Endurance approached Zelanos, the crew could see more details of the crisis. Several major cities were clearly being evacuated, with streams of vehicles moving away from the darkest atmospheric patches. The Zelani were losing their world, and they were running out of places to run to. Captain, Dr. Wright called out, we're receiving detailed sensor data from the Zelani. They're sharing everything they know about the contamination, their failed attempts to neutralize it, and their evacuation plans. Rodriguez studied the data as it came through. The Zelani had tried atmospheric processors, chemical neutralizers, and even weather manipulation to deal with the toxic clouds. Everything had failed. Their gentle world had never prepared them for such a violent assault on their environment. But humans knew about environmental disasters. They'd been dealing with them for millennia. Volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, ice ages, pollution, climate change. Humanity had faced extinction dozens of times and somehow found a way to adapt and survive. All right, people, Captain Rodriguez said, looking around at her crew. We're about to attempt something that has never been done before. We're going to save an alien world using knowledge learned from surviving our own death world. Dr. Park, I want a full analysis of the toxic compounds. Chief Thompson, start thinking about what kind of equipment we can cobble together to address this. Dr. Wright, keep those translations coming. We're going to need to understand everything the Zelani know about their world. As the Endurance entered orbit around Zelanos, the human crew could see the full scope of the disaster below, but they could also see something the Zelani couldn't: opportunity. This wasn't the end of their world. It was just another environmental challenge, and humans were very, very good at those. The Zilani had sent out an SOS expecting sympathy, maybe some emergency supplies, or at best evacuation assistance. They had no idea that help was coming in the form of 12 humans who had spent their entire species' history learning how to make the impossible possible. The real work was about to begin. The landing shuttle descended through Zelanos's poisoned atmosphere like a metal bird diving into a storm. Captain Rodriguez watched the external sensors as they passed through the toxic clouds that were slowly killing this beautiful world. The readings showed concentrations of sulfur compounds, nitrogen oxides, and complex hydrocarbon chains that would have sent any Zilani into immediate respiratory failure. Atmospheric density is about 15% higher than Earth normal, reported Lieutenant Torres from the pilot's seat. The toxic concentration in this area is moderate compared to the worst affected regions. Dr. Park monitored the life support systems. Air filtration is handling the contamination well. We could probably work outside for short periods with just basic breathing apparatus. Through the shuttle's viewports, they could see the Zilani capital city of Zelanthos spread out below them. It was unlike anything humans had ever built. The architecture seemed to grow from the ground like crystalline trees, all flowing curves and organic shapes that sparkled in the filtered sunlight. Gardens and parks were integrated seamlessly into the urban landscape, creating a city that looked more like a carefully tended forest than a metropolitan center. But the beauty was marred by the obvious signs of evacuation. Streets that should have been busy were nearly empty. Many of the crystal spires had their lower levels sealed off, and emergency shelters dotted the city's outskirts where the Zilani had gathered to escape the worst of the contamination. There, Dr. Wright pointed to a large clearing near the city center. The Zilani have prepared a landing area for us. As they approached, they could see a small group of Zilani waiting at a safe distance from the landing zone. The aliens were tall and graceful, with elongated limbs and what appeared to be delicate, feathery appendages along their arms and necks that fluttered constantly. Even through the shuttle's sensors, it was clear they were wearing heavy protective gear. The shuttle touched down with a gentle thud, and Rodriguez looked around at her landing party. She had brought Dr. Park for biological assessment, Chief Thompson for engineering solutions, Dr. Wright for communication, and Lieutenant Torres for security and technical support. 5 humans against a planetary disaster. "Remember, everyone," Rodriguez said as they prepared to disembark, "we're not just representing humanity here. We're potentially saving an entire civilization. Let's show them what Deathworld survivors can do." The airlock cycled, and the humans stepped out onto an alien world for the first time in their species' history. The air was thick and acrid, with a sharp metallic taste that made their eyes water slightly. For the humans, it was uncomfortable, but manageable. For the Zilani, this same air was a slow poison. The group of Zilani approached cautiously, and Dr. Wright activated his portable translation unit. The lead Zilani, wearing what appeared to be an elaborate breathing apparatus that covered most of their delicate features, spoke in those same musical tones they had heard over the transmissions. "Welcome to Zelanos, brave humans," the translation came through. "I am Prime Scholar Zelithia of the High Council. We are honored by your presence, though we fear for your safety in these conditions." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. "Prime Scholar, I'm Captain Rodriguez. We're here to help. Our ship's sensors have been analyzing your atmospheric crisis, and we believe there may be solutions your people haven't considered." Even through the breathing apparatus, it was clear that Zelithia was surprised. "Solutions? Our greatest minds have worked for days without success. How could you possibly—" Dr. Park interrupted gently. "Prime Scholar, may I ask how long your people typically spend researching environmental challenges?" "Researching?" Zelithia seemed confused by the question. "We discuss and analyze until we reach consensus. For a problem of this magnitude, our scholars might deliberate for several seasons before implementing any solution. The humans exchanged glances. Several seasons. Months of discussion while their world died around them. Chief Thompson stepped forward. Prime Scholar, on our world, when the environment tries to kill us, we don't have seasons to debate. We adapt or we die. We'd like to see your research data and then get to work immediately. The translation seemed to struggle with the concept of immediate action, and Zalithia's feathery appendages fluttered in what Dr. Wright was beginning to recognize as a sign of agitation. But surely you must analyze the philosophical implications of any intervention, Zalithia protested. What if your solution creates unforeseen consequences? What if it changes the fundamental nature of our world? Captain Rodriguez felt a familiar impatience rising. Every minute they spent talking was another minute of Zalani suffering. Prime Scholar, with respect, the fundamental nature of your world is already changing. It's becoming uninhabitable. We're here to change it back. The Zalani delegation led them to a transport vehicle that was clearly designed for their much more delicate physiology. The humans had to squeeze into seats that were too narrow and too tall, while the Zalani watched in fascination as the humans adapted without complaint to the uncomfortable arrangements. The journey to the research facility took them through sections of the city where the contamination was more severe. Dr. Park monitored her portable atmospheric analyzer and noted that the concentrations here would cause immediate unconsciousness in most Zalani. Yet the humans sat calmly in the transport, their only concession to the toxic environment being basic air filters over their noses and mouths. "How are you tolerating this environment so easily?" Zalithia asked through the translator. "Our sensors show atmospheric conditions that should be causing you severe distress." Dr. Park smiled behind her air filter. "Prime Scholar, the air in some of our major cities is worse than this on a bad day. We're used to breathing imperfect air." The research facility was a marvel of Zalani architecture, with flowing spaces that seemed designed to promote harmony and contemplation, but it was nearly empty. Most of the Zalani researchers had been evacuated to safer areas, leaving behind only their data and a few brave volunteers in heavy protective suits. Dr. Yazelian, the chief atmospheric scientist, greeted them in the main laboratory. Even through the bulky protection gear, it was obvious the Zalani scientist was exhausted. "Humans," the translation came through. "I confess I do not understand how you can be here unprotected in conditions that would kill me within minutes." Chief Thompson was already examining the Zalani atmospheric analysis equipment. "Different worlds, different tolerance levels. What matters is your data. Show us what you've learned about the contamination." The next several hours were a revelation for both species. The Zalani had collected incredibly detailed atmospheric data with scientific precision that impressed even Dr. Park. Their analysis was thorough, elegant, and completely accurate. But when it came to solutions, they were paralyzed by the magnitude of the problem. "We have identified 17 different toxic compounds," Dr. Wizelion explained, pulling up holographic displays that showed the chemical structures in beautiful, flowing detail. "Each one requires a different neutralization approach. The complexity of designing a comprehensive solution that addresses all 17 without creating new problems is beyond our computational capabilities." Dr. Park studied the displays while Chief Thompson ran the data through his portable engineering computer. Lieutenant Torres was already sketching rough schematics on his tablet. "This isn't that complicated," Thompson said after a few minutes. "You're thinking about this like you need to neutralize each compound individually. What if instead we altered the atmospheric conditions to make these compounds unstable?" Dr. Izelian's feathery appendages went still. "Alter the atmospheric conditions? But that could affect everything. The ecological balance, the weather patterns. The alternative is that everyone dies," Captain Rodriguez interrupted. "Sometimes you have to break things to fix them." What followed was unlike anything the Zalani had ever experienced. The humans dove into the problem with an intensity that bordered on reckless. They proposed solutions that would have taken Zalani scholars months to properly analyze, tested theories in real time, and discarded failed approaches without the lengthy post-analysis that Zalani science demanded. Dr. Park identified 3 key atmospheric components that, if artificially increased, would cause most of the toxic compounds to break down naturally. Chief Thompson designed a network of atmospheric processors that could be built from components the Zalani already had available. Lieutenant Torres calculated optimal placement locations for maximum efficiency. The Zalani scientists watched in amazement and growing alarm as the humans worked. But what about environmental impact studies? Dr. Wazelian protested as Thompson began sketching designs for atmospheric processors. We'll monitor as we go and adjust if necessary, Thompson replied without looking up from his work. What about long-term ecological modeling? We'll figure that out after we stop the immediate crisis, Dr. Park added. What about consensus building with other scientific institutions? Captain Rodriguez looked up from the data she was reviewing. Dr. Ezelian, how many of your people are dying right now while we debate? The translation unit was silent for a long moment as the Zalani scientist processed the question. The casualty reports indicate approximately 300 deaths in the past day cycle. Then we don't have time for extended analysis, Rodriguez said firmly. We need to act now. The concept of immediate action in the face of uncertainty was so foreign to the Zalani that several of their scientists requested permission to observe the humans' work from what they considered a safe distance. They watched in fascination as the Deathworld survivors attacked the problem with a directness that violated every principle of careful Zalani science. But it was working. Within hours, the humans had designed a comprehensive atmospheric remediation system using existing Zalani technology in ways the Zalani had never considered. The plan involved creating artificial updrafts to carry toxic compounds into the upper atmosphere where increased UV radiation would break them down, while simultaneously releasing carefully calculated amounts of reactive compounds that would neutralize the toxins at ground level. This plan has a 67% chance of success, Dr. Ezelian announced after running the human proposals through Zalani computer models. That's good enough, Captain Rodriguez said. Let's start building. But a 67% success rate means a 33% chance of failure, Dr. Ezelian protested. Zalani science requires at least a 95% confidence level before implementation. Chief Thompson looked up from his schematics. Doc, your current plan has a 100% chance of everyone dying. I'll take 67% over 0% any day. The construction phase was where the cultural differences became most apparent. The humans worked with an urgency that seemed almost frantic to the Zalani, but which was actually just normal human efficiency when facing a crisis. They improvised solutions to engineering problems on the spot, adapted designs when materials weren't available, and kept pushing forward even when initial tests showed mixed results. The Zalani, meanwhile, wanted to test each component extensively before installation, analyze every modification for potential side effects, and build consensus among their scientific community before proceeding with each step. Your people's approach to crisis management is fascinating, Prime Scholar Zalithia observed as she watched Lieutenant Torres jury-rig a power coupling using spare parts from 3 different Zalani devices. You seem to embrace uncertainty and work within it, rather than trying to eliminate it before you begin. Captain Rodriguez wiped sweat from her forehead as she helped Thompson install an atmospheric processor. On our world, uncertainty is a luxury we can't afford. The environment doesn't wait for us to be ready. It changes, and we adapt, or we die. But how do you cope with the possibility of making things worse? Zalithia asked. We cope by making sure that doing nothing isn't an option, Rodriguez replied. Right now, doing nothing means your people die. So anything we try that gives us a chance of saving them is worth the risk. As the first atmospheric processors came online, the results were immediately visible. The toxic clouds began to thin in the areas around the devices, and air quality readings started to improve. It wasn't perfect, and there were some unexpected chemical reactions that required rapid adjustments, but it was working. The Zalani scientists watched their displays in amazement as the humans made real-time modifications to the system, adjusting chemical inputs and power levels based on atmospheric feedback without stopping to analyze each change. They're learning as they go, Dr. Yazelian observed with something approaching awe. They're treating the entire planet as a laboratory and adjusting their hypothesis based on immediate results. It's terrifying, another Zalani scientist added, but it's also effective. By the end of the first day, the humans had successfully deployed 12 atmospheric processors across the most severely affected areas. The toxic levels were dropping measurably, and Zalani emergency teams were able to return to areas that had been uninhabitable just hours before. But the real revelation came when one of the atmospheric processors experienced a power failure that caused it to release an unexpected chemical combination into the atmosphere. The Zalani scientists prepared for disaster, but the humans simply shut down the unit, analyzed the chemical reaction, and discovered that the accidental combination was actually more effective at neutralizing toxins than their original design. You're going to incorporate an accidental failure into your solution? Prime Scholar Zalithia asked incredulously. Dr. Park nodded as she updated their chemical formulas. If it works better, yes. We call it happy accidents on Earth. Sometimes the best discoveries come from things going wrong. The concept of deliberately incorporating failure into a solution was so alien to the Zalani that several of their scientists had to be treated for stress-induced illness, but they couldn't argue with the results. The modified processors were clearing the atmosphere faster than anyone had thought possible. As the second day began, the humans faced a new challenge. The atmospheric cleanup was working, but it was working too well in some areas, creating chemical imbalances that could cause different problems down the line. The elegant solution was becoming a complex balancing act that required constant adjustment. This is exactly what our models predicted, Dr. Izelian pointed out. Rapid atmospheric modification creates cascading effects that become increasingly difficult to manage. Chief Thompson was already working on modifications to the processor network. So we adapt the system to handle cascading effects. We build in automatic adjustment protocols and monitoring systems. But what if the automatic systems make incorrect adjustments? Zalithia asked. Lieutenant Torres looked up from his control console. Then we fix them when they break. That's how technology works. You build it, you test it, you improve it. But what if you can't fix them in time? Captain Rodriguez put down her atmospheric scanner and looked directly at the Prime Scholar. Zalithia, let me ask you something. In your society's history, have you ever faced an existential threat before? The translation unit processed the question, and Zalithia's appendages fluttered thoughtfully. No, Captain Rodriguez. Zelanos has always been stable, predictable, safe. This is the first time our world has ever threatened our existence. Rodriguez nodded. That explains a lot. My people have faced extinction dozens of times in our history. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, plagues, wars, environmental collapse. We've learned that when survival is at stake, you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. You do what works, you fix what breaks, and you keep moving forward? But what if you make an irreversible mistake? Then you live with the consequences and adapt to the new situation, Rodriguez replied, because the alternative is not living at all. As they spoke, alerts began sounding throughout the facility. The atmospheric processors had detected new toxic compound formations in the upper atmosphere created by the breakdown products of the original contamination. The elegant solution was becoming more complex by the hour. The Zalani scientists looked at their displays in dismay, but the humans simply rolled up their sleeves and got back to work. This was just another variable in an already complex equation. They would adapt, adjust, and overcome. Prime Scholar. Zalithia watched the humans tackle each new challenge with the same calm determination they had shown from the beginning. These Deathworld survivors didn't just solve problems. They embraced the chaos of problem-solving itself. For the first time since the crisis began, Zalithia began to believe that her world might actually survive. The fourth day brought the crisis none of them had anticipated. The atmospheric processors were working perfectly, clearing the toxic compounds faster than projected, but the rapid atmospheric changes were triggering severe weather patterns across Zalanos. Massive storm systems were forming as pressure differentials, created by the cleanup process, generated winds that the gentle world had never experienced. Captain Rodriguez stood in the emergency command center they had established in the research facility, watching weather satellites track 3 separate storm systems that were converging on populated areas. Rain that should have been a gentle blessing was falling in torrential sheets that threatened to flood cities designed for Zalanos' typically mild weather. The atmospheric pressure changes are causing thermal inversions, Dr. Park explained, analyzing data streams from across the planet. We're essentially terraforming their world in real time, and the weather systems are trying to re-establish equilibrium. Prime Scholar Zalithia stood nearby, her protective gear now modified with human-designed air filters that were lighter and more efficient than the cumbersome Zalani equipment. Over the past few days, she had begun to adapt to the human way of working, though the constant crisis management still left her feeling perpetually off balance. "Our cities cannot withstand these wind speeds," she said, watching the storm projections with growing alarm. "The architecture is designed for harmony with our environment, not resistance against it." Chief Thompson was already running calculations on his portable computer. "How much time do we have before the first storm hits the capital?" "Approximately 6 hours," Dr. Izalian replied from his monitoring station. The Zalani scientist had removed most of his protective gear, trusting in the rapidly improving air quality. "But Captain, surely we must slow down the atmospheric processors." "We cannot allow the cure to be worse than the disease. Shutting down the processors now would be a disaster," Lieutenant Torres interjected from his position coordinating the processor network. "The chemical reactions are in a delicate balance. If we stop now, we could get rebound contamination that's worse than what we started with." Captain Rodriguez felt the familiar weight of command decisions. Save the Zalani from poisoned air, but risk killing them with storms their world had never seen. Stop the storms, but risk a toxic relapse that could wipe out their entire civilization. On Earth, humans made these kinds of impossible choices regularly. For the Zalani, it was uncharted territory. "What would your people do in this situation?" Zalithia asked quietly. Rodriguez considered the question carefully. "On Earth, we'd probably try to do both. Stop the immediate threat while preparing for the long-term consequences." "Both? How is that possible?" "Dr. Park, what's the minimum safe rate we can slow the processors without risking chemical rebound?" Rodriguez asked. "We could reduce output by about 30%, Park replied after checking her calculations. "That would slow the atmospheric changes enough to reduce storm severity, but we'd still maintain forward progress on the cleanup." "And the storms that are already forming?" Zalithia pressed. Thompson looked up from his engineering schematics. "We disrupt them before they reach populated areas." The Zalani scientists in the command center went silent. Even through the translation system, the concept seemed to shock them. "Disrupt the storms?" Dr. Izalian repeated slowly. "You want to attack the weather itself?" "We modify it," Thompson corrected. cloud seeding to encourage controlled precipitation, atmospheric heating to disrupt pressure differentials, strategic particle dispersion to break up wind patterns. It's not attacking the weather, it's redirecting it. But the ecological implications, Zalithia protested. Weather patterns affect everything from plant pollination cycles to migratory creature routes. How can you possibly predict all the consequences of such massive intervention? Dr. Park was already downloading Zalani ecological data into her portable computer. We can't predict everything, but we can monitor the major systems and adjust as we go. The alternative is letting these superstorms destroy your cities. You would risk unknown ecological damage to prevent known structural damage? Dr. Izelian asked. We would prevent immediate catastrophic loss of life and deal with ecological adjustments as they arise, Rodriguez replied firmly. Your people are dying right now. Everything else is a problem we can solve later. The next 6 hours were unlike anything in Zalani recorded history. The humans deployed weather modification technology that they improvised from Zalani atmospheric research equipment, combining it with techniques that seemed impossibly reckless to Zalani sensibilities. They fired silver iodide particles into cloud formations from modified atmospheric processors, turning violent storm systems into controlled precipitation events. They used focused microwave arrays to create thermal columns that disrupted pressure differentials, causing massive storm fronts to break apart into manageable weather cells. They even used the toxic cleanup network to inject specific compounds into the upper atmosphere that encouraged cloud formation in unpopulated areas while dispersing it over cities. The Zalani watched in amazement as their weather, which had been their world's most predictable and gentle feature, became a complex system that the humans controlled like a vast atmospheric orchestra. This is impossible, Dr. Izelian muttered as he watched rainfall patterns redirect around the capital city while nearby agricultural areas received carefully measured precipitation. Weather control at this scale should require massive computational resources and years of careful modeling. Chief Thompson was monitoring a dozen different weather modification systems while simultaneously adjusting atmospheric processor outputs. It does require massive computational resources. That's what this is. He gestured at the improvised network of Zalani science equipment that the humans had rewired and repurposed. And we are doing careful modeling. We're just doing it in real time based on actual results instead of theoretical projections. But what if you make an error? What if one miscalculation creates a feedback loop that makes everything worse? Lieutenant Torres looked up from his weather tracking console. Then we identify the error, correct it, and keep going. That's how you solve complex problems. You don't wait until you can guarantee success. You start working and improve as you learn. The concept of iterative problem-solving under crisis conditions was slowly beginning to penetrate Zalani thinking, but it still felt chaotic and dangerous to their methodical minds. As the day progressed, the weather modification efforts proved successful. The 3 major storm systems were broken up and redirected, providing much-needed rain to agricultural areas while sparing the cities from destructive winds and flooding. But the effort had required the humans to work at a pace that left the Zalani observers exhausted just from watching. How do you sustain this level of activity? Prime Scholar Zalithia asked Captain Rodriguez as they monitored the atmospheric cleanup progress. Your people have been working continuously for 4 days, adapting to new challenges every few hours, making critical decisions with incomplete information. How do you not collapse from the mental strain? Rodriguez smiled as she checked the latest atmospheric readings. The toxic levels were now below dangerous thresholds across most of the planet, and the weather systems were stabilizing into new but manageable patterns. This is what we do, she replied simply. On Earth, the environment is constantly trying new ways to kill us. Storms, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, climate shifts, new diseases, predators. We've been dealing with crisis adaptation for our entire evolutionary history. This is just Tuesday for us. Just Tuesday? Zalithia struggled with the translation. A normal day, Dr. Park clarified as she prepared her final atmospheric analysis report. Captain Rodriguez means that this level of environmental crisis management is routine for humans. The implications of that statement settled over the Zalani scientists like a heavy weight. These humans, these Deathworld survivors, considered planetary atmospheric crisis management to be routine. On the fifth day, as the atmospheric processors moved into maintenance mode and the weather modification systems were scaled back to minimal intervention, the true scope of what had been accomplished became clear. Not only had the humans successfully neutralized the atmospheric contamination that threatened to destroy Zalani civilization, they had done it while simultaneously learning to control Zalanos weather patterns and improving the planet's overall atmospheric composition. The air is cleaner now than it was before the crisis began, Dr. Izalian announced as he reviewed the final analysis data. The atmospheric processors didn't just neutralize the toxic compounds, they optimized the entire atmospheric mixture. Oxygen levels are up 3%, harmful trace gases are down across the board, and the new weather patterns are distributing moisture more evenly across the continents. Prime scholar Zalithia studied the reports with growing amazement. You didn't just save our world, you improved it. We fixed what was broken and optimized what was working, Chief Thompson replied, as he powered down the last of the emergency systems. It's what we do with any system we work on. But you did all of this without detailed prior knowledge of our world, without extensive testing, without consensus building, Zalithia pressed. How were you so confident that your approaches would work? Captain Rodriguez finished her final log entry and looked up at the Zalani leader. We weren't confident they would work. We were confident that we could make them work, or fix them if they didn't, or adapt to whatever consequences arose from trying. The difference being? Confidence in the outcome versus confidence in our ability to handle whatever outcomes occur, Dr. Park explained. We knew we could adapt because we've been adapting to changing conditions our entire lives. Over the following days, as Zalani cities returned to full operation and the emergency evacuation centers were closed, the relationship between the two species began to evolve beyond the initial crisis response. The Zalani were eager to learn more about human problem-solving approaches, while the humans were fascinated by Zalani scientific precision and collaborative decision-making processes. Your people's method of extensive consultation and consensus building has real value, Captain Rodriguez told Prime Scholar Zalithia as they walked through the capital city's restored gardens. In situations where you have time to be thorough, your approach produces elegant, well-considered solutions. And your people's rapid adaptation methods are clearly superior for crisis situations, Zalithia replied. But I must ask, how do you prevent your quick decision-making from creating new problems? We don't prevent it, Rodriguez admitted. We accept that quick decisions will sometimes create new problems, and we deal with those problems when they arise. The alternative is to let immediate crises destroy us while we're trying to prevent hypothetical future problems. As the Endurance prepared to depart Zalanos, the cultural exchange had become as significant as the environmental rescue. The Zalani had learned that sometimes survival required embracing uncertainty and acting on incomplete information. The humans had learned that their crisis-adapted problem-solving approaches, born from millennia of surviving on a death world, were actually extraordinary capabilities that most civilizations had never needed to develop. Before you arrived, Dr. Rizalian said during the farewell ceremony, we believed that intelligence meant careful analysis and cautious implementation. We thought that wisdom meant avoiding risk and preventing change. We never understood that true intelligence might mean embracing chaos and managing uncertainty. And we never realized how unusual our approach might seem to others, Dr. Park replied. To us, adaptability and crisis management are just basic survival skills. We didn't know they were remarkable. Prime scholar Zelithia presented the human crew with crystal sculptures that captured the atmospheric data from their world's rescue, artistic representations of the successful collaboration between their species. These crystals will sing with harmonic frequencies that match your atmospheric processor outputs, she explained, so that we never forget the music of salvation that came from the stars. In return, Captain Rodriguez gave Zelithia a small sample of Earth soil sealed in a transparent container. This dirt contains microorganisms that have survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, and everything else our death world could throw at them, she said. They've been adapting and evolving for billions of years. Consider it a reminder that life finds a way to survive, even in impossible conditions. As the Endurance departed the Zolano system, both species had been fundamentally changed by the encounter. The Zolani began developing rapid response protocols for environmental management, acknowledging that their perfect world might not always remain perfect. They started training emergency response teams in human-inspired crisis adaptation techniques. The humans, meanwhile, began to understand that their survival-driven culture had given them capabilities that were remarkable in the broader galactic context. They weren't just another species exploring space. They were pioneers whose unique evolutionary background had prepared them to solve problems that other civilizations couldn't even approach. "Captain," Dr. Wright said as they entered warp speed for the journey home, "I've been analyzing the linguistic patterns in Zelani communications. Their language structure suggests they're not the only species in this region of space. There might be other civilizations out here." "Other civilizations with other problems," Lieutenant Torres added thoughtfully. Captain Rodriguez looked out at the stars ahead of them, thinking about worlds full of beings who might face crises they couldn't handle alone, species who might need help from survivors who had learned to thrive in chaos, who could adapt to any challenge, who never gave up when the odds were impossible. "Send out a general transmission," she ordered. "Let any listening civilizations know that if they ever need help with problems that seem impossible to solve, they can call on the humans. We'll come running." "What should we call ourselves in the transmission?" Dr. Wright asked. Rodriguez smiled. "Tell them we're the species from the death world, and that we specialize in making the impossible possible." Behind them, Zelenos continued its gentle orbit around its stable star, its atmosphere cleaner than it had been in centuries, its people forever changed by the knowledge that somewhere among the stars were beings who could perform miracles in the face of disaster. And ahead of them lay the vast galaxy, full of worlds and species and problems that might need the unique touch of beings who had learned to survive by never accepting that anything was impossible. The Death World survivors had announced themselves to the galaxy, and the galaxy would never be the same.